Hey guys, so I'm back with the same deck that we were discussing last week, but as a lot of you may know, audio issues came up in the middle of the session, so we had to terminate it. So we are back again this Friday, and I'm hoping to see a lot of you guys back again. We're gonna be running through the deck once again for a quickly, that is, and then I'll go back to taking your questions. So, if you haven't already joined in, do come fast. I'll be starting in another 1 2 minutes. And today's session is going to be about the benchmark analysis and real world usage and basically how to review a smartphone. I'm sure Swapnil, my colleague, had already taken you guys through the camera bit, and my bit today is about performance testing. So we're just waiting for a few of you guys to turn up, and then we're going to begin this session. And before I begin, while I'm running through the presentation, leave your questions in the live chat and I'll take them up one by one moment I'm done with the presentation. So, yeah, don't forget to leave your questions. That's what we are here for today. Just waiting for a few of you guys to join in. If you guys can hear me, if there's everything all right with this presentation, just let me know in the live chat and we will get going immediately. Moment you enter, just drop in a hi or a hello so that I know a lot of you guys are watching and I'll get going, right? So yeah, today's session is going to be about how to review a smartphone. Decepticon 1982. Hello there. Glad that you have joined us. We'll just get started with a few more viewers. Arpit, good evening. Good evening. How's it going for you? Right. So our topic today is on how to review a smartphone. Yes, I am audible. I have made sure that the earphones that I am using doesn't die out. So hopefully it won't in this session, and we're gonna have a good session this time. So yeah, let's begin. I think a lot of you guys have already joined in. Tushar, hi. How's it going? Right. So let's quickly get started then. And before I begin, let me just remind you this session does have a contest attached to it. If you have followed the previous session hosted by Swapnil about camera testing, and if you're attending today's session, you can be a Digit certified smartphone reviewer because we'll be giving you all the secret details that we use in our reviews to you guys so that you guys can also write your own reviews and make a name for yourself in the industry out there, right? And so this is all you have to do. You have to attend today's workshop, and you should have attended yesterday's workshop as well. And then, based on how we describe it to you, all the processes that we mentioned, you need to submit your smartphone review to us using the description using the form given in the link below. The form link is given in the description below. And if it meets our standards, we'll be evaluating it. Of course, we'll be reading through all of your reviews. And if it meets our standards, you'll earn a certificate that says that you are a Digit certified smartphone reviewer, which you can use to leverage brands to give you guys devices and make a name for yourself. It basically renders a lot of credibility for you guys because we've been doing this for the past 20 years now almost. Yeah, we started way back in 2001 and it's 19 years already. And this month we are anyway celebrating our anniversary. If you haven't picked up our anniversary issue from the stands, you can go ahead and do so. We also publish our online version of the magazine, so you guys can also check that out. And yeah, that's basically about this contest. Now let's get into the nitty gritties. Right. So this is what a smartphone review should be covering. You need to keep it, you need to basically test the claims that the OEMs make in your review. So if the OEM is saying that this smartphone has the best display in the world, it's your job to test it out whether it is indeed the best display in the world, right? So things like that you need to keep in mind. And it's also always good to keep your review short and simple, because the person who's coming to read your review is actually planning on buying the phone, and he probably doesn't want to read a huge novel like text, right? So it should always be short, simple, and to the point. You shouldn't be going round and round in circles and confusing the reader. It's your job to convince him to, whether this is the device that they want. Yeah, that's what your final verdict should be. It should be definitive. It should be an all encompassing. It should basically take into account all that you have found in your review and give a verdict whether it's good, bad, worth buying, or not. And the primary goal in doing a review, as far as we are concerned, is to suggest the buyer if the device is worth the price. I mean, there are no bad smartphones per se. I mean, the OEMs, when they release a smartphone, they do substantial amount of research to know what the consumer is looking for. And one, this like a smartphone will find a taker, someone or the other. Even like the worst of the worst smartphone will be purchased by somebody out there, which is basically the aim or the target audience for these smartphones. So it's your job to find out whether this particular smartphone that you are reviewing right now does fit the bill for a specific category of users that the smartphone is trying to cater to. That should be your main goal. And here's how to go about it. We divide our review sections into performance testing, battery testing, display testing, and then there's camera, and then there's design and display. Design is mostly subjective. It varies from user to user. What may be good design to me may not be good design for you, right? So we don't really spend all that much time evaluating a design. If it's if it's handy to hold and has some sort of water resistance, and make sure of using all the right components inside, it's a good design, right? It's an usable design. I wouldn't call it good. Good is again very subjective. But as far as the display is concerned, there's some things you can test without buying expensive equipment. So I'll be starting with performance testing right now. Let's see. So performance testing involves basically running benchmarks, checking real world usage, doing a bit of gaming, and all the other things. Basically using the smartphone and see how it performs, because the raw performance that a smartphone delivers ultimately decides how the smartphone is going to respond when the going gets tough, when it has to crunch a lot of numbers or run a lot of apps at the same time. So having good performance is basically the most essential aspect of a good smartphone. So we use a bunch of benchmark apps to test the synthetic performance. I would call it synthetic because these are standardized tests that are made to run on every smartphone that comes to our labs, right? So CPU benchmarks, GPU benchmarks, and storage benchmarks. This is what we divided in broadly. For CPU benchmarks, we have Antutu, Geekbench, Mobile Expert, and PC Mark to Work 2.0. These are four different apps, and we specifically choose some specific tests within these apps. It's like for Antutu, we run the main Antutu test, which gives us a big 6-7 digit score. And for Geekbench, we run the Geekbench 5 CPU for both single core and multi core. For Mobile Expert, sorry. For Mobile Expert, we run the full suite of tests, and we clock the time taken by the phone to finish those tests. And for PC Mark, we run the PC Mark Work 2.0 test. So, excuse me. What do we look for in this CPU benchmark analysis? Basically, the higher the number, the better it is in scores for Antutu, Geekbench, and PC Mark. For Mobile Expert, the lower the time taken, the better it is. And then to get a good idea of where the smartphone stands, we take smartphones that are similarly priced and have more or less the same hardware, and then we see how they shape up. A good variance to have would be around 100 to 100 points between two smartphones. And if they do have that, then there's nothing really separating the performance of these two smartphones. So even though your Antutu scores are differing by around 100 to 500 points, that's still a good number to have. Like both of these two devices that you are testing are more or less pretty equal in terms of performance. And you also, every time you run an iteration of the test, you're going to get different scores. The scores won't be the same. And then you should also look out for benchmark cheating, right? How do we do that? For that, we use this specialized paid app called GameBench, which gives us a look into how the CPU was behaving while we were running the benchmarks. So if we see that all the cores are running at 100% capacity the entire time of the test, then it's definitely cheating to get the high number that it scores. That's because in real world, the all the cores do not run at the same time. There are variable frequencies. It uses the big little architecture to, you know, dedicate tasks separately to each core so that more power is saved. By running all the cores together, you end up heating your device to a larger extent, so much that thermal throttling may kick in, or you won't really get sustained performance because eventually the CPU is going to heat up and it's gonna cut off the performance boost that you have gotten by maxing out all the cores. So that's something to keep in mind when you're running benchmarks. And for GPU benchmarks, here's what we go through. There's 3D Mark Slingshot Extreme, not the regular one. We use the 3D Mark Slingshot Extreme and we run both OpenGL and Vulkan tests, right? For iPhones, the 3D Mark test uses the Metal API that Apple uses. So that's a different thing and cannot be compared with Android devices. So there's 3D Mark Slingshot Extreme, then there's GFX Bench. For that, we choose the Asterisk Ruins, Card Chase, and Manhattan 3.1. All of these are the on-screen tests. And for high-end phones, we choose the high-tier tests. For the low-end budget phones, we use the low-tier tests, right? So these are the GPU benchmarks. What do you look for in these numbers? Well, once again, the higher the better for these numbers. And we also recommend you to take another smartphone that are priced the same, have the same specifications inside, and then compare the numbers within these two. Again, variance that we see between two very similarly performing phones is around 100 to 200 points. Anything above that indicates better performance. But if it's in that envelope of 100 to 200 point difference, you're good to go. It's a good device as compared to the other, right? So that was our GPU benchmark analysis. And finally, we're going to move on to storage. Oops, my bad. Uh-oh, what's happening? Go back, go back. Wait just a second. Yes, here we are. Storage benchmarks may we run this app called AndroBench. Um, it's probably the fastest benchmark test that you'll be running on your smartphone because it takes a matter of seconds to do this test. We take into account four metrics, that is sequential read speed, sequential write speed, and then random read and write speeds. So just one test that's there in the app will give you all these numbers. You clock it up, higher the better again. Um, that's what we are telling you here. That the higher read write speed indicates that the memory is fast enough to fetch data as soon as you demand it. So you're going to see a good increase in read write numbers when you're going from say eMMC storage to UFS 2.1 to UFS 3.0 and even after UFS 3.1. But after a point from UFS 3.0 onwards, they're quite fast enough that we are moving from 3.0 to 3.1. You will see some improvement in the read write speed, but not all that much that will make like a huge difference whatsoever. So keep that in mind when you are reviewing a smartphone. So that was our performance testing. Now let's move on to battery testing. But before that, I don't have that included in this deck. But one second. Yeah, we don't have that included in this deck. That is gaming performance. That's also a really crucial aspect of testing a smartphone is to play games on it because we have games like COD Mobile and PUBG Mobile and the new Forza Street as well. And there's this new game that I'm playing called Life After. And all these games are really taxing on the CPU and the GPU. So it's good to see how your smartphone responds to these games. Usually, a smartphone will be tuned to run PUBG Mobile or COD Mobile pretty well. It's what we have seen usually in our labs where we've seen smartphones under rupees 10,000 clocking like 60 FPS with high stability in COD Mobile, while on PUBG Mobile, even if it achieves 30 FPS, it's good. Now, I understand this is not a good real way to, test, look at the frame rates that a game or an app is delivering on a smartphone unless you manage to root it. But there's this app called Game Bench. For that, you have to pay for, like, we pay $1,000 a year to get access to that app, and that gives us almost everything about the gaming performance of the phone at, well, the game that we are running. But if you don't have access to it, which is more likely, you can always keep two smartphones side by side and play on them, and then see how big of a difference each of them provide. It's always good to have a benchmark device. Benchmark device means the one that you know for sure performs the best in this category that you are testing. Like for gaming, I would choose the ROG Phone 2, which is my daily driver right now. And every time I'm trying to do a gaming test, if a game runs very smoothly in the ROG Phone 2 and doesn't on another phone, then I have reasons to call out that phone for its lackluster gaming performance. So it's good to have a benchmark device, even if you don't always have access to apps that gives you like the granular metrics around how the CPU is behaving while you're gaming. So that's the gaming performance bit. Now let's look at battery testing. This is a very crucial aspect, because what good is all that hardware if you don't have if the smartphone basically shuts down after half a day, right? So having a long battery life in any smartphone of any price is really crucial. So it's also the most difficult test to do, because there is no one standard test that fits all smartphones or all types of usage, because my usage of a smartphone will differ from yours, because I may be playing a lot of games on the smartphone, but you may be taking a lot of videos on the smartphone. So your battery life that you get out of your smartphone may differ from what I get from mine. So how do we standardize it? There are a few different ways. One is this video loop test that we run. We select a video file, preferably a 1080p file of any duration, that doesn't matter, and we run it on loop using the VLC media player app. And we keep things like mobile data and Wi-Fi turned off, so that we just look at the how much the display is taking up your battery and how long can it last. And we set the brightness to the maximum, and then we use this another app called battery log to record every single drop in percentage of battery. And moment the phone hits 1% or 0%, we turn it off, and then we look at how long the phone took to go from 100 to 0% while the video was playing. So that is a good way to check out the battery life. But that's not the all. That's not like the final number that you should be arriving at, because this isn't a real world battery drain, right? Nobody would be playing videos 24 hours on their phone. So to make it a little more suited to the real world usage, we take a couple of games, couple of streaming apps, and then we play them for a good 15-minute, 30-minute break and see how much the battery drained. So for this, we keep the phone charged to around 60 to 70%. That's when the drop is more uniform, more visible. And we play 15 minutes of either PUBG Mobile or COD Mobile at the highest graphic settings, and then we record how much the battery drained. So if the battery was at the beginning of the game was at 70% and it drops by 5%, it's a good number to have, because that's what we have seen. 5% drop after 15 minutes is okay for that matter. If it doesn't, then it has a much bigger battery like the ROG Phone 2, which drops around like 3 to 4% after 15 minutes of gaming. And then we also play 30 minutes of a movie on either Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hotstar, and then we note the battery drain very similarly again. So here again, we usually see a variance of around 3 to 4% in battery drop while we're playing 30 minutes of a video. And then we also run Google Maps navigation using GPS with GPS turned on to see for an hour at least to see how much the battery drained. Again, here the numbers varies between anywhere between 7% to 8%, depending on the size of the battery. So if it's much lesser, then that phone is very well optimized to handle to offer long battery life, right? So that was real world. Another crucial aspect of battery test is to also test the charging speed. Now, this is also really fun, but a little bit tenacious because you do have to wait and see after every 15 minutes, 20 minutes, how much the phone has charged. So for that, you need to drop the battery of your phone to 1%, and that's where you should begin the test at. And then you plug in the charger that comes with the box, so that you maintain uniformity. You don't need to use a third party charger to show that it charges fast, because most people will be using the charger that comes out of the box, right? And then you start a timer moment you start charging it, and then you note the battery charging levels after 15 minutes of charging, after 20 minutes of charging, after 60 minutes, and when it finally hits 100%. So you should note this down and mention this in your review for anybody to have a good idea of how fast the phone charges. So that was battery testing. Then we have display testing here. Again, this one requires some special equipment, which most of you may not have. Even we don't have that equipment yet. So what we do is we use an app, again, called Display Tester, which is available on the Play Store. You just download it and go to tests, defective pixel detection, and it's going to give you a bunch of solid colors to see on your screen. And it's good to have another smartphone again of the same specifications, of the same around in the same price segment, and compare them side by side to see which looks better. You'll be noticing subtle differences, like differences in the tone of the color, like the shade of red will differ from one smartphone to the other, and it's up to your eyes to know which is better, right? So that's one. Secondly, in the same app, you go to test, and there's a bunch of real world photos out there which are taken with the camera, and there you can see how the color reproduction works when you're looking at a dynamic uh, looking at a photo that's like has dynamic colors, like different colors in different areas and lights and shadows and all those things. So this one, again, you should compare it side by side with another smartphone and see which one looks better. And you should mention the fact that you have taken this smartphone as comparison, and this is what you saw between these two smartphones. It's not always easy to get this on video or get this on an image, but as long as you can say that with good rigor, then it would be fine, right? So that's one part. Then there's sunlight visibility as well, which is also very important because we live in India where the sun tends to, scorch our minds out. So your smartphone, when you use it under the hot afternoon sun, it tends to wash out the colors. No smartphone will be able to display the absolute colors that it shows when you're indoors. So you should see how much of the color accuracy drops when you're outside, how much are text visible, how much are you can see a video on the screen when you're out in the sun. So all those things need to be seen here as well. So that was a quick look at sunlight visibility. So yeah, this was it. Uh, you guys have already attended the June 4th session with Swapnil about camera testing, and I hope you guys have already enjoyed it. So that was my quick run through this presentation. I will be going back and taking questions from y'all. And yeah, let's see what all questions are here already. A lot of you guys are saying that you guys have written your reviews and submitted it. That's great. We will be going through those reviews one by one and will be evaluating them. If it meets our standards, you guys are gonna win a Digit certified smartphone reviewer certificate. So, which will come handy to you if you are trying to enter this industry, right? So, doesn't we should check the performance of gaming and running apps and check whether it's CPU heating? A question from Aditya Kumar. I think you're asking about whether you should be looking at the CPU heating as well while you're gaming. Yes, most definitely. But good point of starting to look for heating would be to whether if you can actually feel the phone getting hot while you're gaming. If it doesn't get hot, then there's no point in talking about it, because that should be the norm. That should be the status quo, that for all smartphones to not heat up while you're gaming. So, unless the phone heats up like really badly, that's when you start looking for heating on your smartphone. But having said that, you should also keep a look at whether the phone is running actually cooler than most other smartphones, and that's also a good point to highlight in your review. So Sudeep is asking, please share the rating criteria. How do we assign a review rating to a smartphone? That's a very good question, Sudeep. So what we do is we have our bunch of formulas that we apply to each test that we do. So say we have a bunch of tests like Antutu, we have Geekbench, we have 3D Mark. So for each of these tests, we assign an ideal number. We assign suppose the best smartphone that we have reviewed gets a score of around 400,000 on Antutu. So that becomes our ideal score, right? And the score that your phone that you're reviewing receives should be in comparison to that. And then we also assign weightages to these tests. So Antutu will have, say, a weightage of 10, while 3D Mark will have a weight of 8. Geekbench will again have a weight of, say, 5. And you multiply these numbers and you arrive at one final number, which is out of 100, and you get a good rating out of that. So it's up to you to devise your own formulas and devise your own weightages depending on who you give more importance to. But broadly, you should divide your review into separate categories like performance, camera, battery, display, and design, and then rate each of them individually, and then arrive at a final number by taking an average of those scores, right? So, Sudeep, what's the last date of submission? That I think will be Tarun's responsibility to tell you, and he should be able to inform you via the squad channels of communications. So, oh, Arpit has already answered the question. It's 12th of June, so you still have some time to write your own review. Um, Imam Sagar is asking a question: how to differentiate between paid reviews and honest reviews? Nowadays, smartphone manufacturers pay a hefty amount to glorify their products and give good reviews. That's again a very concerning question, which we do agree happens in this industry. But at the end of the day, if you shouldn't be going by what the reviewer says in his verdict, rather you should be going by what he's showing in his review. So if he's showing all the tests that he has done and he's showing you the numbers that he has achieved, and then he's telling that, this smartphone does perform very well, it's an honestly done review, and that person has worked hard on his review and not basically botched up the numbers to arrive at the fact that it's a great phone to buy. So you should be looking at the process that the reviewer takes, and if it's thorough, if it's objective, then it's a good review to have. If it isn't, and the reviewer ends up bashing the brand or praising the brand a bit too much without backing up his claims, it's mostly there's something shady going on out there, right? Imam Madi. Hi, Imam Madi is asking this next question. His another question is, my question is that while we are moving out in the sunlight, the visibility of the smartphone black out up to 70% by a normal brightness. So this can harm the display or anything else. I don't really get what you're trying to say. Are you saying that whether you should be keeping the display at 70% brightness, or are you saying that the auto brightness boosts the brightness levels by 70% when out in the open sun? I'll be waiting for your clarification so I can take this question up in a better way. I'll move on to the next one. Arpit have asked, in that form, all things are mandatory to fill. Since you are saying that we have the final verdict and camera review, then what we have to do about the other question? Arpit, again, this is one question that Tarang will be answering for you. I am just here to take you through the process of testing the smartphone. Muhammad is asking, the review once submitted in the docs cannot be edited. Click on the docs link. It's taking me to docs with every field empty. Okay, Muhammad, I will highlight this to Tarang and we'll get this fixed. Um, In battery testing, when we are playing videos at loop, the sound should be full. Aditya, yes, you should be keeping the volume at full. Basically, you should be emulating how you would be watching a video on your phone. So if you watch the video using the loudspeaker, then yes, you should be keeping it on. If you watch it using headphones, then no, there's no point in keeping it on because the sound will come through the headphones and not through the phone. So as long as the video plays in a loop, you're good to go. Huh. Arpit, in review, we need to give the balance on pros and cons. There's no need. If it has more pros and then cons, it's okay to say that. If it has more cons than pros, then it's okay to highlight that as well. No smartphone is perfect. Every smartphone will have its pros and cons, but how many? It depends upon what you find and how you test it. So, okay, I think I've run out of questions to answer. So I'm hoping you guys will be asking a few more questions. And oh, Yashraj has asked another question. Should we use Gcam or the default camera app while testing the camera? Well, Yashraj, take it like this. Gcam is only used by enthusiasts. Not a lot of people know that the Pixel camera app can be installed in other third-party phones outside of the Pixel family. So yes, it can be a good way to say, excuse me, that to your readers that if you don't find the camera performance all that good, here's another app that can make it better. But to solely judge the camera performance based on a third party camera app would be a little foolish, wouldn't you say? Because we use the default camera app much more than the Gcam. So I don't know. You shouldn't be using Gcam in your review, but it's always good to have another video or an article to highlight whether there's any big difference between a Gcam photo or a default camera app ka photo. Huh. Imam has given us his clarification, which while moving out in summer days, normal brightness will display blackout up to 70%. So normally it is not visible, but increasing the display brightness, can it harm the display criteria? Okay, I think I get what you're talking about. You are talking about the display becoming a little faded by around 70%, according to you. That is the case. That is what we are talking about when we talk about sunlight visibility, is the fact that the brightness levels that you experience in indoor conditions doesn't always get emulated when you're outside. Not always, it doesn't at all get emulated when you're outside, be it on an iPhone or even a Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus or even the Mi 10 for that matter, right? So you have to look at how much is the difference that is caused when you're moving outdoors, and that is what you should be looking at in sunlight visibility. Basically, if you can read a text or an article with crystal clear clarity without having to squint your eyes in direct sunlight, it's a good display to use outdoors. But if it can't, then it needs to be highlighted, and your readers should be aware of it. Right. What about sound testing? Aditya, again, sound testing is very subjective. What may be good sound to me isn't shouldn't be good sound for you. So that's something that we leave out in our reviews, but you can always take it up and give your own judgmental opinion on it, because unless you have equipments to test the audio quality with the frequency mapped and the loudness and everything else, there's we don't really dabble in subjective conjecture in our reviews. But having said that, if say a phone does show a lot of have like loud volume out of the loudspeaker, it's important to highlight that fact. I can tell you that the ROG Phone 2 that I am using right now, it does have a super loud speaker. As compared to that, the IQ3 5G, which I also use as a secondary device for me, it doesn't have all that loud sound. But does that mean the quality of the sound that you get out of these speakers is bad? No, it's still good quality. Just the loudness differs from in the ROG and the IQ, so that means that can be highlighted. But we usually leave it out because there's no one way or an objective or a scientific way to test it out without having to invest in expensive equipment. Right. So a phone has a battery of around 3800 mAh, but it charges real fast. So what will be the review of the battery? Tricky question, Ishu Sharma. Um, See, the battery life at the end of the day should be measured about should be is basically about the time the phone lasts without charging it. Even if the phone charges super fast, you still have to find a plug point around you to top it up, or a power bank fast enough to top it up at that speed. Because and since that is not the case all the time, having a long battery life is important in a smartphone experience. However, if the OEM is compensating a half a day battery life with faster charging, it can be useful to some set of users who, don't venture out all that much, or don't have to be outside traveling or commuting the half the day or the whole of the day. So for him, it's a bad smartphone, but for somebody who, stays indoors, it can be a good option to have. Because 1300 mAh battery should mean that it should get at least around 4 to 5 hours of screen on time easily, depending on the hardware that it has. Issue is asking again another question. If a phone has a pop-up camera, which is a mechanical party which can break, so will it be considered as a con? Well, unless you find it breaking or coming apart in the process of your review, it shouldn't be a problem, because OEMs usually claim the fact that they have tested these pop-up modules thousands and thousands of times in their labs to find whether they have any sort of issues after long-term use. So you should always mention the fact that there's movable parts, and the very nature of movable parts in a machine is the fact that they tend to dysfunction after long periods of use. So yeah, it should be highlighted, but it shouldn't be taken as a con, because at the end of the day, it also allows for the screen to stretch all the way to the edges, and it depends upon the buyer whether he prefers a punch hole camera to get a bezel-less display, or a pop-up camera to do that, right? Mohammed is asking, I've noticed the charging runs out faster when charged with a dash charger and slower when charged with a 5-volt 2 ampere charger. Devices OnePlus 3, 3T, 5, and 6. Okay, that is an observation that we haven't really come across, but we'll take this up in our labs, or you can, record a video and show it us yourself, and we'll probably look at it. And if it's good enough, it's worthy enough, and objective enough, we'll, give you some shout out in our page. Right. Arpit is asking, while testing, when we have to use benchmark tests just after configuration of device, or after 2 3 days, because we get different results in both cases. What I usually do is, if you're running getting different results after 2 or 3 days, that's because you have loaded up the smartphones with more apps, and the smartphone has the hardware has a lot to do inside all the time because of all the services and apps that are running. So a good way to start off with benchmark testing is to install all the apps that you would usually have on your smartphones, and get them configured and get them up and running while you're doing a benchmark test. So that way you'll get a more realistic number, a more realistic idea of how the smartphone performs, because the smartphone right out of the box will look very smooth and fast. Even very poorly made and a poorly optimized smartphone will feel fast right out of the box. It's only after using it for 3 4 days do you feel the fact that it has slowed down or it's still the same. So yeah, you should always load up the smartphone like you would in your daily driver, and then go about in benchmark testing. um Imam, thank you for asking your question. I'll move on to the next one. What do you think of LG's Quad DAC? Why won't other OEMs add it? That's not true. LG's Quad DAC LG was probably one of the first OEMs to include a DAC in their smartphone offerings. But the fact that even the Mi 10 comes with a DAC, and there are a few other smartphones that comes with a hi-fi DAC inside as well. And a big reason for a lot of OEMs to not include a DAC is the lack of demand for it in the market. Not a lot of people are audiophiles who, want the best crystal clear FLAC sound out of their smartphones. A lot of them just want loud sound with a lot of bass and, with good vocals. So that's what most OEMs look at, because they're ultimately looking to sell their smartphone to a mass market and not to a niche category. So yeah, but there will be always be exceptions like the LG smartphones or the Mi 10 for that matter, which will have a DAC and that will set it apart to users who are looking for good sound from their smartphones. Issue is asking another one. Can the performance of a phone differ by the amount of internal storage used at the time of testing? Um, Not really. It's not something that we have seen happen. But at the same time, if the internal storage tends to be fuller, like if you only have 1 GB or 2 GB of storage left in your internal storage, then that does impact your performance. But if it's around 50% full, you won't really see any difference in performance. So I think that's that. No more questions are coming in, and we may be able to conclude this session. I hope a lot of you guys did enjoy this session. I hope was able to answer all your questions with a good vigor, and we're going to catch you guys again in another video. So thanks for watching.